So welcome everyone to the session on the vulnerable leader. It's really great to have you here. I want to say a big thank you to you on behalf of my social enterprise, Rocking Your Teens. Some of you made donations, and that will go towards increasing resilience, inspiring and raising aspirations in teens as well. And if anyone wants to find out more about Rocking Your Teens, please go to rockingyourteens.com. My colleague Snetta is going to, or has already added the URL for Rocking Your Teens if you want to find out more about it. So my name is Jenny Garrett. I'm an award-winning career coach, author, and leadership trainer. My books explore the empowerment of working women and women in leadership roles. And together with my team, we use our years of experience in coaching and leadership to support women and ethnically diverse leaders to progress at work, as well as supporting majority group leaders in making inclusion happen. As a leader, is it okay to show vulnerability? How do you actually do it, and what happens when it goes wrong? Brené Brown and many others advocate vulnerability as a quality of great leaders. But how do you actually do it? So will employees see you as weak, you might be thinking, or will they take advantage of your openness? Or will you be accused of oversharing? We hate it when people go too far in their sharing, don't we? Executive coaches Hira, Ali, and Geetha. Actually, Geetha, I'm not completely sure how to pronounce your surname, but I'm going to try. Ramachandran. Okay, yes, not too bad. Okay, we're going to explore this topic today. Our insights will provide an invaluable and refreshing pause, we hope, give you some new perspectives, and also challenge your thinking. Okay, so we'll be discussing what leaders have to gain from showing vulnerability, what vulnerability for leaders actually looks like in practice, and how to take the first step in being vulnerable at work. And during my experience as a coach, leaders often want to be vulnerable, but they're just not sure how to do it. So we really hope you're going to come away with some tips, some strategies, and some ideas to help you. Hira and Geetha are both listed in the Diverse Coaching Directory, a directory which connects corporate organizations with coaches from Black, Asian, and ethnic minority backgrounds. And my colleague Snetta is going to send you a link to our growing directory in the chat. As I said, we will be discussing what it means to be a vulnerable leader today. So how it's going to go today is that Hira and Geetha will briefly introduce themselves. I'm going to start off with asking a few questions, and then we're going to open it up to a discussion with you. So please do feel free to share your questions and your reflections in the chat. My colleague Snetta will keep an eye on the questions, and she'll make sure that we answer them as long as we have enough time to do so. So don't worry, even if I don't come to your question straight away, Snetta will have flagged it up to me and I will be coming to it. We also encourage you to use social media. We're using the hashtag for this event, Vulnerable Leadership. And you have Hira Ali's Twitter, which is Advancing You, and mine, which is at Jennifer Garrett. And also the directory is at BAME Exec. But you can also find us all on LinkedIn if that's your social media of choice as well. And again, Snetta is going to add those handles and hashtags into the chat so you can find it really easily. I always like to start off with a poll because then we get to know who's in the room and where you're at. So the first poll is really understanding who you are. It's an anonymous poll, so I won't know who said what, but it's great to know what's your position in an organization. Are you a senior leader? Are you from HR? Are you in diversity and inclusion? Are you a line manager? Or are you an aspiring leader? And if you're something else, just add it in. someone muted me, or it suddenly muted me. Hopefully it won't keep doing that, but hopefully you can hear me okay. Fantastic. Okay, so nearly all of you were 80%. Few more of you, let us know who you are. It'd be great to get to 90%. Any more for any more? Okay, we're at 84% of you who have answered that poll. So I'm going to share it with you. And as you can see, nearly half of you are senior leaders, 15% are human resources, 13% in equality and diversity, 13% line managers, and 13% aspiring to be line managers. So thank you for all of those of you who did vote there, just so we know who's in the room. So we're thinking that what we're getting is that it's a high percentage of senior leaders thinking about how you can show your vulnerability, still be respected, and still lead. Great. And I have a second poll for you. And this is your perspective on how much vulnerability is shown in the workplace. So leaders showing vulnerability at work, is it rare in your workplace? Is it occasionally shown in extreme circumstances, or is it commonplace? So how is it happening in your place of work? Just give you a few minutes, well, a few seconds to vote again. 70% of you have voted. Be good to get over 80% again, like we did last time. Give you 5 more seconds. Great. So we've got 85% of you have voted. I'm going to end that poll and share the results. So it's occasionally shown in extenuating circumstances, half of you have said. And I suppose that's if something extreme happens where people need to show emotion. Otherwise, it seems that it's not being shown very much. That's really interesting. 28% say it's rare. Oh, and well, 23% say it's commonplace, which is really good. So some of you are in a space where actually vulnerability is shown a lot. And it's interesting really to think about how you feel about that. Is vulnerability being shown a good thing? Is it not? So feel free to be typing in the chat as we go through, sharing your perspectives, because actually I'm quite surprised that 23% of you say it's commonplace in your workplace. I think that's a really good thing, but I think it's interesting how you feel about it. I'm hoping that I'm not going to keep getting muted, but seems that for some reason Zoom is muting me at some time, so I'll keep an eye on that. So thank you. So it'd be really great if Hira and Geetha introduced themselves and just told you a little bit about them. We'll start with you, Hira. Please let us know a little bit about you.
Good morning, everyone. Very pleased to be here today. I am an author, writer, career coach, and leadership expert. I have written 2 books in 2019, which I would like to think are popular books. In 2019, I wrote a book called Her Way to the Top, A Guide to Smashing the Glass Ceiling. And I have another book coming up this month on allyship, which I'm very excited about.
Wonderful, Hira. Thank you so much. Brilliant. And over to you, Geetha.
Hello, everyone. Lovely to be here. My name is Geetha Ramachandran, as Jenny correctly pronounced. I am an executive and leadership coach trained in psychology, transformation, and change. I received the Telegraph Woman of the Year Award in 2018, Made a Difference Award from Acumen Commercial Insights in 2014, and Job Excellence Awards in companies like Siemens and Bell Northern Research. I have a passion for transformation coaching, especially senior leaders, because I believe this creates a certain ripple effect within organizations. I use things like the leadership circle, which as a leader, it helps you look at it from an inside out perspective to leadership, and it helps you know where your identity is coming from. My company is called Powerfully Human Coaching and Consultancy. So the name gives you a clue as to what I believe in. I've been working for over 20 years across different cultures and industries as a coach and also as an agile and lean practitioner.
Wonderful. So as you can hear, we have two wonderful panelists here with a wealth of experience to share. And it's been really exciting to hear their perspectives on vulnerability. And it's great to see that the conversation has already started in the chat. What we're hearing from the audience is that vulnerability is shown at work, but often between peers, not senior leaders really showing their vulnerability. And we're being asked about the connection between compassion and vulnerability. And I think there's a huge correlation there. But let's get into our first question, because I think that's a good thing to do. So what do leaders have to gain from showing vulnerability is what I'd like to ask you first of all. And I'm going to start with you, Geetha. You know, is there a lot to lose, or is there lots to gain from showing vulnerability as a senior leader?
So I think there is a primary gain, and then there are some secondary gains, and they're both equally valuable, right? The primary gain is the deeper connection a leader gets with the people they lead. And this could lead to secondary gains like gaining their trust, inspiring loyalty, their mental health, because there is no fear. And Brené Brown calls this, you mentioned pain. There is a pain actually in wearing this heavy armor of perfection, she calls it. And when you take it off, when the leader is willing to show vulnerability, that means the people they lead also feel comfortable in taking that armor off. And there is no fear to say, and that means you can have accountability where people are willing to say, hey, I did this with all my best intent, and this is what happened, and it's okay. And I will learn next time. So I believe these primary and secondary gains are the fundamental big pluses of being vulnerable as a leader.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point, the role modeling aspect of it. If I don't see my senior leader being vulnerable, what permission do I have to do so? And so there's a responsibility to really role model that behavior if you want to see it in the culture of your organization. Hira, what's your perspective on this? What do leaders have to gain from showing vulnerability?
I would say that first of all, I think first and foremost, it's very good for your own mental health, because you don't need to outrun or outsmart uncertainty or risk exposing emotions. You don't need to know everything. I think that's something which really scares leaders, not knowing something. And I think COVID-19 has proved that not everybody can have all the answers. So in that situation, when you are open to making mistakes, you let go of perfectionism, because as Geetha pointed out, perfectionism can be exhausting, not just for ourselves, but for people around us. So you let go of perfectionism, you're less afraid of failures. And personally from me, if I can share my own example, moving from country to country, being vulnerable was the only choice I had, because if I hadn't been vulnerable, then it would be too much pressure for me to be able to build my leadership brand from ground zero in every new place that I came to. So I think personally, I would say, of course, all the team advantages, fostering creativity and accountability are benefits. But I would say individually as a person, for you and the people around you, being vulnerable really helps lighten the mood and improving the environment.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. This trying to be super tough. I think over the last year here, it makes so much sense that we have, because we've been let into each other's homes, we've seen pets, we've seen children, we've seen whoever, that we've actually been more human, haven't we, and brought our humanity into the workplace. And the truth is, it was always with us, wasn't it? I mean, you can't park yourself at the door when you walk into a building. It was always there, but now we've been more open, and I think that's brought more connection, more humanness to the workplace. And as you said, this mental health aspect is so key. People are thinking about it more. This idea of compartmentalizing ourselves to the work self and and the outside work self, I think was never working for us. And many people have always advocated taking off the mask and being you. And it's been hard to do, but maybe COVID has enabled us to do more of that. So yeah, fantastic points from both of you. Now, someone already in the audience has said, I need to know what it actually looks like in practice. So they were reading our mind, and that is my second question, really. What does vulnerability for leaders look like in practice? It's one of the biggest questions that I get asked when I'm coaching people, when they're thinking, yeah, but where's too far, and where's the limit, and how do I do it, and am I going to embarrass myself, and will I be able to come back from it? So I'm going to start with Hira first this time. Yeah, what does this vulnerability for leaders look like in practice?
It's different for every other person, right? And when you were starting, I would always say start small. You don't have to go tomorrow in the office and start oversharing and telling the whole world about your problems. I believe just by, and especially in light of what's happening, the recent events. I wrote a book on allyship, and a lot of people there said that we are afraid to say the right thing, and that really scares us. We are fearful of being judged. And I would say just sort of sharing with people that you are fearful of being judged, or you don't know anything, or you would like to know better, or if you did make a mistake, apologizing and saying that, I want to do better. I think those are some of the steps which everybody can easily take in the workplace. And be mindful that not everybody is going to open up immediately. It's going to be a gradual process, so you have to keep working at it.
Lovely, great tips there. Thank you. And Geetha, what's your thoughts?
Sure, I definitely agree with everything Hira has mentioned so far, and I would like to add to it. I think vulnerability comes in different flavors and types, right? It could be either one-to-one, or it could be from a leader to a group. And it could be something as simple as, for example, a leader taking aside a mentee and saying, thank you for allowing me to mentor you. Or it could be a leader sharing with their team after a presentation, or admitting that they didn't do the presentation well. Or it could even be a CEO owning up to their organization or to their people, saying, taking ownership that an initiative failed. It doesn't have to be sharing your deepest, darkest secrets. The key in vulnerability is to keep it relevant to the other person. And there is often it's perceived as weak to be vulnerable, but then it doesn't have to be. I take a completely different spin on the word weak. And there are ways in which you can be vulnerable. But in practice, I do believe it looks like this, like it looks small, it can be big, it could be anything. But then if you keep it relevant to the other person, and if it comes from a place of humility, I think that's what makes it shine.
Wonderful. Great points from both of you. Just drawing on Brené Brown again, she talks about something called a vulnerability hangover. The fact that when you kind of share, that afterwards you can feel quite exhausted by it, and you can feel like, oh, you can be questioning, did I do the right thing? Should I have said it? And I think there's something about this space when you are vulnerable to be really kind to yourself as well, and to be, give yourself space. Not just sort of express some vulnerability and then rush to the next Teams meeting or whatever it is, but to recognize that there's some recovery work that you might need to do as part of it. But I'm thinking, I've been doing some team coaching with senior leaders recently, and what it's looked like when I've looked at it has been the senior leader saying, actually, I have some personal stuff going on right now as well, and I'm finding it a bit harder. I'm finding it a bit tough. Or actually, I'm not sleeping. There's a lot of change going on in the organization, and I'm not sleeping at the moment. And just saying those things, not saying I'm falling apart and the world is over and I'm not able to lead you, but just saying, everything isn't perfect for me. I'm not bulletproof. I find things difficult too. Is enough, I think, then for everyone else. You just see people physically go, okay, I don't have to pretend. I don't have to pretend to be perfect now. They struggle, they have challenges too, and that's okay. I don't think it looks like I'm brand new to the organization as a senior leader, and I say on my first day, I've got no idea what I'm doing. Who knows why I got this job? It doesn't look like that level of vulnerability, even though you might be thinking of it, because I think then you're undermining yourself a bit. So yeah. I think it's situational. And as Hira and Geetha both said, I think it's small steps in the right direction in order to show your vulnerability. But I think it can undermine you at times. So I think it is about thinking about when and how you decide to be vulnerable. Hira wants to say something.
Yes, Jenny, I wanted to say something. This is really important. What was very strange was when I did my survey for Her Way to the Top, and I surveyed 300 women, it was just women, and now I've surveyed men for my second book. There was a difference in how people showed up in terms of vulnerability. So people who ran their own businesses or who were in charge, I think they found it easier to be more vulnerable as compared to those people who were working at an organization or working for someone else. And they found it slightly more challenging because they felt it. What if they'll be judged? But I think bottom line is, if, like you said, if we normalize it and if we start speaking about it, like, I'm taking a week off, or this week is going to be, this week I'll be looking after my mental health. I think just talking about those things makes people understand that, that person is going through something. Let's give the person some space. And I think authenticity does shine through. If you're genuine, people will know that you are, you're going through a bad time, or if you've made a mistake, and they will be ready to move on.
Yeah. That reminds me of what both of you have said. Reminds me of something called the vulnerability loop. Daniel Coyle, he's the author of The Culture Code. He refers to it as that. In a vulnerability loop, Jenny, you were talking about reciprocation. So there is an intent and willingness to share, and then you have a willingness to receive. And often what happens, what closes the loop, is the person who's listening then reciprocates. And often there is a question, of course, for leaders: what if I am the only person sharing? What happens? Am I left feeling uncomfortable about it? But then it's often the case that this reciprocation does happen. And if it doesn't, it depends, of course, what you're sharing, when you're sharing, how you let yourself feel as you're sharing. But then if the reciprocation does not happen, it's okay. It dissipates and it goes away, and it's fine. So I thought the loop concept was important here to appreciate as well.
Yeah, such a good point. And it just makes me think about coaching generally. We're all coaches here. And the fact that when you're coaching, you want to build rapport quite quickly with your clients. And an aspect of that can be a bit of self-disclosure. That aspect of, maybe I don't know so much about your industry, but this is not what we do in coaching, or you're talking about your experience. I have some understanding of that because, and just that it's a connector, isn't it, really? So vulnerability, although we're thinking, oh my goodness, what could be the consequences? It can also be such a connector in terms of relationship and rapport and chemistry between people. And when we're trying to build relationships, and we're doing that online a lot now, this could be an important tool for you to get a bit deeper in your relationships. It's also made me think something I want to ask you here, and I didn't prepare this question, but about this idea of being a minority in the workplace. And this, when you're a minority in the workplace, whether that's around gender, ethnicity, disability, whatever it is about, often you experience that imposter syndrome, don't you? And when you experience that imposter syndrome, often you don't want to show any weakness because you're already feeling like you don't belong. And I just wonder about this idea of either how we help people express vulnerability in that situation, or how vulnerability might be useful. Any perspective. I said Hira, but also Geetha, you can also chime in if you have any perspectives on that.
I agree that when you are the only one in the room, for whatever reason, you feel different. There are certain factors which you will experience as, for example, imposter syndrome. And what is interesting is that most of these factors are intertwined. So if you feel, am I good enough? Then there will be fear of failure. There'll be fear of vulnerability. There will also be self-promotion gap, because, if I'm not good enough, and what if I fail, then am I good enough to even self-advocate for myself? So these are all very strangely intertwined. And I feel that when personally for me, this has really helped. That, when I was suffering from imposter syndrome, or when I felt that, oh my God, I'm in a new country, new culture, new people, I was very scared of failure and judgment. I thought being vulnerable is going to be my way out, or actually my way in, because that's how people are going to accept me, and people will know that I am going through a hard time. And if I open up, then it's going to help me loosen up and overcome my own feelings of insecurity. So I would say that, yes, if you are being vulnerable, then all of this is impacted. If you start telling people about, I don't know everything, and that's all right. You don't need to know everything. Even if you're a senior leader, it doesn't mean that you have all the answers, or I made a mistake and I'm sorry, I would like to do better. And those things will actually impact your, your inclination to take more risks and foster creativity in the work environment.
Lovely, thank you. Do you want to add anything there, Geetha?
Sure. So it's a very important question, right? I see someone also mentioning in the chat, yeah, what do you do if you feel like an outsider already? If you're in the minority, often there is this sense of like, do you have pride in who you are and what you bring? Yes, of course, there are occasions when everybody in the room is sharing a life experience, and that's completely different from yours. So what do you do? And Brené Brown here says, when you are in that vulnerable place, examine yourself and ask yourself, what is it I'm feeling? It could be one of four things: shame, embarrassment, humiliation, or guilt. And then she differentiates, saying shame is one category, guilt, embarrassment, and humiliation is another. Those are behaviors. This is identity. If it's guilt, if it's embarrassment, if it's humiliation, it's okay. It's like saying, I did that stupidly, and that's okay. You can get over it. Whereas if you think I am stupid, that's shame, and that's your identity. And this is where, when it comes to, if you're from a minority group, self-awareness is important. Ask yourself, what is it I'm feeling here? And then try and examine what, so then you look at it in these four lenses and it makes sense.
That's so helpful. And I guess, if I think about my personal journey, it's been about the connection with authenticity, really. It's been that even when you are in a minority group and you think you can't be yourself, ultimately, when you're not being yourself, you're not really connecting with people. And the more you are you, the more you do connect, the more people see you and value you and can appreciate you for who you are. So although it's the scariest and hardest thing to do, when you've maybe been taught to assimilate and fit in and behave like other people, and maybe that's got you so far, this idea of being a bit vulnerable and a bit more open, I think enables you to be more authentic and then connect at a deeper level, which then takes you further. But I'm not going to say it's not scary. And I think what we're talking about is scary stuff, actually. It shouldn't be, is it? Be yourself. I guess the first thing you need to do is find out who you are, because you can't be yourself or be vulnerable if you don't know who you are and what you want to be vulnerable about. So this is a journey, and I think one of the things we're not doing is saying just go out there and bear all immediately. We're suggesting that you think about this and explore these things. So my last question before we open it up to questions is, so please do type your questions in the chat, is how can leaders take the first step into being vulnerable at work? And I know you've shared a little bit already, but yeah, what is the very first practical step that someone can take away from this session today and do something with? And I think I started with Geetha last time, I'm not sure, so I'll start with Hira this time.
First of all, focus on the personal benefits.
We're not hearing you so clearly. If you can maybe come a bit closer to your mic.
Can you hear me now?
That's better.
I would say, first of all, focus on personal benefits, because when you start being vulnerable, chances are that people will not always accept you. And that can be disengaging, and that can be uncomfortable, and actually discourage you from being vulnerable again. So don't do that, but focus on your personal benefits. What will you gain from being vulnerable? It is going to be, and I personally feel that when you're personally connected to any cause, it just, irrespective of whatever people are saying, you still hold on to it dearly. So focus on the personal benefits, see how it's going to benefit you, and just normalize speaking about mental health. Just like you pointed out, Jenny, saying that, I'm taking a week off, I need to preserve my energy, or I need to take some time off to do this. And even if it's like holding a meeting and learning about certain issue impacting a minority and saying that, I would like to learn more. This is something which I believe I don't know much about, and I would like to know more from you. So things like that. These are just examples. And of course, there could be lots of different things you could do.
Fantastic. Thank you. Brilliant examples. What about yourself, Geetha? What do you think?
I think the very first step a leader could take is to become self-aware. What makes you feel vulnerable? And this is quite different for different people. For someone, they could feel completely comfortable in sharing everything that happened in their personal life and not think twice about it, and they're okay. Whereas for someone else, it could be even expressing that they feel that emotion. It could make them feel vulnerable. So for a senior leader to first become self-aware, what is it that you do with people you're totally comfortable with and you wouldn't do with others? And ask yourself why. And that self-awareness, I think, for a leader could be the very first step they could take.
Absolutely. And one of you, when we were talking previously about this, we're talking about the fact that it's been a hard time and people are exhausted. And so even if I guess, you might be thinking, I'm going to be vulnerable and open, people just might not have the energy to reciprocate that. And right now it might just be, that might be just too much for me, or it might open the floodgates. So I think there's something about the expectation of others as well. And how much you expect of others, not to expect too much back from them. And for that to be okay. In coaching, what we know is that sometimes between sessions, a lot of work happens, doesn't it? It doesn't always happen in the room with us. We've planted seeds and people keep thinking. And I think as a senior leader, as you were saying, Geetha, you might not get that immediate reaction, but that doesn't mean it hasn't landed and it hasn't made a difference. So I think these things are really important to acknowledge. I think things that you said were also things like courage to say, I'm sorry. Yeah, I'm sorry, I made a mistake. That's vulnerability in action, isn't it? And that's really respected. I think that with the politicians we have at the moment, I think we'd really appreciate this. Instead of this was the plan and this is all great, actually we made a mistake and we're really sorry, but we're trying our best. I think if we actually heard that from our politicians, we'd all be like, oh yeah, great, okay, thank you for apologizing. That's all we need. So we have a question here. Is the test whether vulnerability compromises your ability to do the job or enhances it? So is that a test? So for you to think, and I guess for you, will my vulnerability help my work and help my relationships, or will it put them at risk? The person's asking, do you think that's the test of whether vulnerability is good or not? What do you think about that?
I believe definitely self-awareness is the first step. But you also need to evaluate the organization culture and the team around you. And as you pointed out, Jenny, that people are exhausted at this point. So even if you are vulnerable, chances are that they might not open up immediately. So that sometimes, and I don't want to, sugarcoat it, sometimes it might backfire and people would be like, what are you talking about? We don't want this. It's fine. We're tired. We're exhausted. So be ready for that it might backfire. But if you are genuine and if you feel that you are doing this sincerely, eventually it's going to help your work. But I would say also situationally, just sort of look at what has happened. If there are specific incidents that have happened, then people might be too overwhelmed with emotions to respond to anything. So you turning up and being vulnerable will actually not work in your favor. So I would say evaluate the situation and see where it's going to work better.
Wonderful, wonderful. Anything to add to that, Geetha?
Sure. I would add, the word test is very interesting, right? It's a great question, by the way. Firstly, is it a test for yourself or a test for others? And also, what makes you trust the other person? And that's a similar question then to ask of yourself. So if you are able to say and do things which helps others see who you are, then they can trust you more. And in that respect, there is a certain element, smallest of elements of vulnerability that you can always show, which helps with your job, because that does create that connection and that trust and inspires loyalty, as we said before. So yeah, great question. I think that's something for each person to explore.
Yeah, and when I think about being vulnerable, I don't think I think about it as a tool. I don't necessarily go and think, oh, I'm going to be vulnerable now because that's going to get my staff to work harder or whatever. It's actually, you know, it's an expression of just being genuine, isn't it? It's like, this is where I'm at, and I'm sharing it with you, and I think it's appropriate to do so. So I think it's more about that. It's not necessarily like a tool. I'm going to be strategic, or I'm going to use a personality profile. It's a bit different, isn't it? It's a bit deeper, and it's, you know, it's connected to our emotions and how we feel. And I think sometimes we're not in control of it. I think when I can be vulnerable, it's when I switch off being an autopilot. So people will often ask me how I am, and my automatic reaction is I'm fine, I'm good. But if I actually take time to ask myself, how am I really? Then sometimes I might be more vulnerable. I might say, oh, you know, I'm really tired at the moment. Like last night was a really hot night and humid night, and I didn't sleep as well as I would have normally. Yeah. So I think it's this switching off autopilot and really thinking, what is the answer to this question? The true answer, not the automatic answer.
Yeah,
really helpful. Now, here
and for values as well, right?
Yes.
Your values as well.
Yeah.
A little bit on that too.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, here you said that sometimes it backfires. Sometimes you do it and it doesn't work for you. And then people might be wary of trying again, because they might say, well, I tried it once, I was vulnerable, and now my team, I don't think they have the same respect for me. What tips would you have for someone who's maybe tried it and now thinking that doesn't work for me?
And focus on the personal benefits, because if you see personal benefits attached to something, even if people are discouraging you, you would still hold on to it, and then and chances are it will backfire. So a lot of times, honestly, it will. I would say, do not get discouraged. Talk to somebody, vent it out. Sometimes you need a support group who will tell you that, well, you know, what you did wasn't actually that bad. It was a good thing to do. People did receive it well, but hey, it's okay, maybe next time. So don't bottle it up. Don't say, oh my God, you know, this has happened and it's never happening again, and shut off. Talk to people, let it out, and have that, you know, I always say a personal board of directors, and you can seek advice from them and say, do you think I was okay? And then if most of the people think it's okay, then I would just say that wait for the people to open up, but you do you, and you continue doing, maybe tone it down a bit and see that, okay, maybe I shouldn't overshare so much. So I'm going to try and hold back a little bit, but continue doing it.
Wonderful. Thank you. It's about this persevering and tweaking. It's like anything that you try, isn't it? You might do it and you might think, oh, maybe I needed to say something up front. Maybe I needed to do it with a different audience. Maybe I needed to say it in a different way. But it's not about stopping doing it. It's maybe about tweaking the way that you do it. But I think that's what I'm hearing from you, Hira. Thank you. And Geetha?
Earlier we were speaking about your values and what you believe in, right? If you believe it's right to be authentic, if you would like to be authentic, as human beings, we all learn to walk. And when we were learning to walk as babies, we took a step, we fell down. It must have felt weary, but we didn't give up. Otherwise, we would never have learned to walk. So we stood up, we walked, we tried again, and we kept doing it again and again. And suddenly we could walk. And similarly, if you genuinely believe it's your intent to be authentic, then ask yourself, why did it backfire? Is it the what and the how? And the why is clear, but the what and the how and the when, maybe is that something you need to work on? So try to get to the root cause of why it backfired. And that might give you a clue if you're strong in that intent.
Great points. And Geetha, you know, what do you think is the difference between oversharing and being vulnerable? I mean, I don't know if you've ever come across anyone who you think's oversharing, but what do you think? How can people know the difference, or yeah, how can they make sure they're not in that oversharing category?
Yeah, it's a good question. There is a certain wisdom in that. I refer to the week as an acronym, right? W for wisdom, E for empathy, A for authenticity, and K for kindness. And there the wisdom is knowing what to share and when to share. As in, if you are pouring it all out, then there is perhaps something you need to take a step back and reflect and think again. Somehow, always in the right way of sharing, it's somehow connected with the other person. And when you sense that connection, it's often the case that showing vulnerability would click and it would work. And it's not pouring it out, and the too much could be like deepest, darkest secret. It doesn't have to be that. That's what would tell you how much is too much.
Lovely, thank you. Do you want to add anything, Hira, or do you feel that Geetha's?
Which you also learn with experience. I mean, there's no fixed rule as to how you overshare and when you overshare. So this is something which is going to come at trying, failing, then trying again, and seeing what exactly is the right fit for the person that you're sharing with. And I would say always working in small steps helps, not making sure that you're just taking gradual steps and progressing slowly rather than one day just turning up and sharing everything there is to share. So that would be my advice.
Wonderful. And I think vulnerability, this idea about vulnerability, I think is not a daily, I don't know if it's a daily occurrence with your team. I think that it's about thinking this is me sharing with you right now. But if every time it's about you and what's going, is it all about you? I think might be a time when you recognize you're oversharing, when this is about what's going on for me, this is about how I feel. And too much of that is that, I think then you're oversharing. You're not really thinking about, okay, I'm just being open and honest here. But when it's just me, this is going on for me, these are my problems. I think then you'd recognize that you're oversharing as well. Wonderful. Geetha, while I'm asking the next question, someone's asked if you can put your acronym week in the chat. So if you could do that, that would be amazing. So the next question is about company culture, and that's been brought up quite a lot, actually. This idea of it's not just about whether you want to be vulnerable, it's about the kind of culture that you're working with. I had a conversation with some journalists yesterday. They said it's highly competitive culture, it's highly critical culture. Showing your vulnerability in that space is really challenging. So if someone does have a company culture that's all about being tough, about being competitive, about being critical of each other, what do they do to work on that, to create spaces for vulnerability? You go, Hira. Yes, absolutely. While Geetha's typing.
Situation. It's not a very great situation to be in, I will confess. And also with imposter syndrome, it's the same thing. If you are in an environment which encourages you to always be your very best and you're as good as your last project, then again, these feelings pop up. And then what do? So I would say, I don't know, try and feed in that feedback. If there is a way in which you could speak to your HR team, or if there are teams involved in which you can fill anonymous surveys, do a poll, tell people and share with them, or even with your immediate manager that this is stifling me and I am feeling very, very locked up here. I feel claustrophobic almost, because if you're not able to express your emotions, that's what you feel. And take it from there. But I unfortunately would like to say that if this is a culture which is not doing anything about it, and you've repeatedly tried and made an effort, because unless you've made an effort, nothing will really change. It's always the small steps. It begins with you. So try and see if there are small interventions which you can make, or if there's something which you can do by speaking to the relevant people, and see if that helps. But if this is going on a continuous basis, then you might want to consider switching from that particular team, or department and going to a place where you can be yourself.
Fantastic, thank you. Great. Geetha, do you want to add anything to that question about culture?
Could you repeat the question in context for me?
Absolutely. So I was talking about the fact that some cultures are highly competitive, highly critical. They're tough. You know, you work here and you're tough. You work long hours and you get on with it. And if that's your culture, it's difficult then to be vulnerable. You know, how do you work to change that, or how do you thrive within that when you want to express some vulnerability?
Yeah, there are two things to that, right? Firstly, as a culture, it's good to have psychological safety within that culture. And there are ways in which you can build that psychological safety within your culture. That's a piece of work, a coaching piece of work in itself. The second bit, something that each and every one of us can do in that kind of tough culture, is to find, say, one leader who has the ability to be vulnerable, and then you build a little pocket around that person, and it's like that little bubble of psychological safety which you can stay in, and you can kind of, it almost revives you and refreshes you. And then slowly it kind of this vulnerability loop, little moments happen and reciprocation happens, and slowly it can build. So there is a macro piece of work that can be done, and then there is this micro piece of work that can be done too. It's tough, it's hard, and sometimes it could kind of, it's like you say, it could make you feel weary, right, when the environment is not right. But these are the two things which often can help.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there will always be pockets of good practice, even if it's just in an employee resource group where we can all just say, this is what it's like to be us, and it's hard here, and I'm finding this difficult. There will be pockets, whether it's in groups, whether it's with individuals, there will be spaces. But of course, the culture might be really hard to thrive in. And as Hira said, you might have to make choices, or you might need to introduce them to what vulnerability could look like and how it could help. And why it can be really a blessing for organizations. So then you might share the work of Brené Brown, the work of David Coyle. There's so much literature on here now, out there now. And I think, I think it's Stephen Covey's son wrote about trust. You know, how can you have an environment of trust without vulnerability? I think that's really hard. So if they think about what they're trying to nurture, what the company values are, vulnerability does need to be in there somewhere. And if it's not, it might even just be holding up a mirror to your organization and saying, we say these are our values, but this is how we're working. What do we need to change? If you're in a position to do that, I think it was 50% of the audience as senior leaders, you are in a position to shape this. You're not a victim of it, you are shaping it. However it is right now, you have been integral to making that happen, and you can change that. So I think that's important to consider. So yeah, so we've talked about how we know when we're kind of oversharing, how we know when we're having a bit too much vulnerability, and we've also talked about the context a bit. You know, what's coming out of here is that this is not necessarily easy, and I think it does take personal qualities like courage, doesn't it, to be vulnerable. And I wonder if, in your experience in either coaching or in your corporate lives, if you've seen or met anyone who's really good at this, and if you can think of what they've done that you've admired in terms of how they've expressed vulnerability. So if you can think of anyone, it might be a role model, it might be a client, it might be someone you worked with previously. If you just think, yeah, you showed me what this looks like so that I could role model it in my own way beyond that. So I don't know which one of you might have an example. Yeah.
When I was working for a pharmaceutical company back in my country, this was for 12, 13 years back. So I did have an HR director who used to have weekly meetings, and in every meeting he would share something from his personal life. So for example, I remember there was a week when his wife was having a brain surgery. It was a very tough week for him. And he shared it with everyone. He told people that I am in a not a very good place, and I would need some space. And if you and apologize, and he did apologize in advance, even though, I mean, it's no excuse to be rude to people, but people can understand that if you are irritable, if you're going through a difficult period. So he said in advance that if I am irritable, or if I am not very receptive to your ideas, or you walking into my room or discussing something, then please understand that I am in a very dark place right now, and I'm going through a difficult time. And I just felt that everybody was so compassionate in the room, and they immediately wanted to give that space. And I think that was a great learning moment for me. Just sharing with people openly and apologizing in advance or after, and saying that I was going through a bad time. So this is something which I probably came across as rude or condescending or whatever it is that uh, you were seen doing. Just sort of owning up and taking responsibility. That was a good learning moment for me. And my father has always been my great role model for me. He always says that it's always better to own up your mistake. I mean, in a room, if you're able to convince people about your viewpoint, then that's great. Persist on it. But if you are not able to, and if you feel that you've made a mistake and other people are right, then always say that I've made a mistake and I'm open to looking at this from different viewpoints.
Fabulous. Yeah, great role models out there, really showing us how it's done. And Geetha?
I am a big fan of, I'm not sure if you've heard of Ed Catmull. He's the co-founder of Pixar, and he had worked alongside Steve Jobs, and he's retired now. But then there are things, if you read about his life, it's absolutely inspiring as a vulnerable leader. We spoke about Daniel Coyle earlier, the author of The Culture Code, and he writes about this interview where he met Ed, and he was asking, "Wow, this building looks great," and Ed was sharing, "You know what? We had these challenges, and these were the problems, and like this corridor." And Daniel Coyle said he need not have said that to me, but then it was related to what I asked, and it was something about what I said and what I needed to hear. And immediately it showed his vulnerability in the sense that he was not pitching it to be a perfect thing and that he had done perfect things. And that kind of culture, we've spoken about tough cultures before. And within Pixar as an organization, they create intentional moments of discomfort where people intentionally go in it. And then when they come out, they are that little bit more cohesive. And I'm an agile and lean practitioner, and we do something called retrospectives, where again, it's people openly sharing what went well, what did not go well, and creating that safe space during that time to be able to share what's happening to them and how others can support them. I think these calculated, uncomfortable moments where people go in with the intent that is something which is fantastic. And for me, the work that Ed has done and with Pixar, it's hugely inspiring. I think of him as a great example of a vulnerable leader.
Wonderful, wonderful. And yeah, I've just, we're running out of time, unfortunately. So we always end our sessions on a coaching question that we'd like to leave the audience with. I definitely have seen that people have asked for books and things like that, and I will share books we've mentioned when I send you the recording. I'll make sure that we get all the books mentioned out there and any other resources anyone else wants to share. But I want to leave you with our coaching question. So Geetha, I'm going to ask you first. What's the big coaching question for anyone who wants to bring more vulnerability into their approach to leading?
I would like to repeat something I said before and post it as a coaching question. What makes you feel vulnerable?
Lovely. So the question to be asking yourself is, what makes you feel vulnerable? And Hira, the same question. What's the big coaching question for anyone who wants to bring more vulnerability into leading? Yeah.
Actually taken from you, because I've learned a lot about vulnerability from you as well. I've written a whole chapter in my book and you have been quoted in that too. So this is something which is actually came from you. It's a very good question. And this is about how vulnerability or the exposure of vulnerability impacts those around you. So is it going to be positive for them, and especially for your children or the people who see you as role models? So question that. I mean, how is it going to influence people around you positively? And if it is positive, then I would say go on with it.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that's such a really good point. Yeah, if you think of something that's bigger than yourself, it can be worth it. It can be worth making yourself vulnerable for. And for me, vulnerability is a strength. I've been my strongest through being vulnerable. So thank you everyone for attending today. A very huge thanks to Hira and Geetha. You can find more about them in the Diverse Coaching Directory, a directory which connects corporate organizations with coaches from Black, Asian and ethnic minority backgrounds. And Snetta Ever Efficient has already put the link in the chat. You will receive a recording of this session. And with that, there will be a list of links that you can then connect with and explore this further. We really hope it's been a useful session. It's been interesting to see your comments and your thoughts as well. Really great to see you engaging in this conversation. And what I encourage you to do is continue the conversation. Maybe you post a question on social media. Maybe you talk to your colleagues today who you come across. Maybe you just think, you know what, next time someone asks me how I am, I'm going to tell them how I really am, how I'm really feeling, and just see where that takes me. So do take those small steps in the right direction. We have a range of webinars coming up in the coming months, so do check it out. Things like, I think, recruiting people well, recruiting diverse staff, and much more. Excuse me, got a frog in my throat now. So we will see you soon. Thanks ever so much, everyone, and take care. Thanks. Thank you, Geetha. Thank you, Hira. Stay on for 1 minute, please, both of you, before I close. But bye to everyone else. Take care. Bye.
Bye, everyone.